Grace and peace and spoiler alert for John Henry, the 2020 movie starring Terry Crews and Ludacris. I am a huge Terry Crews fan. I think that both his real life persona and his roles on screen are just fantastic and a pleasure to watch. And I'm a huge myths fan. I love tall tales and legends and great stories. My interest goes beyond movies, even though my YouTube channel is focused on movies. And so when I saw there was a new version of John Henry, I was excited to watch it, and I was pretty disappointed. What we got was a pretty boilerplate script. You know, Terry didn't do anything wrong. He was fine in it. It just wasn't that great of a film, which is too bad. But the plot, if you've seen it, you'll know that there's that repetition of that line by John Henry's father. It says, "My boy's strong. My boy's John Henry. What are you gonna do with all that strength, John?" So in the story, Terry Crews plays a man by the name of John Henry who is not John Henry. He is named after the character from the Tall Tales and Legends. So the Tall Tales and Legends exists within the John Henry story, and it kind of sort of mirrors the John Henry legend in a way. In that Ludacris, who is this cousin enemy of John Henry, has a metal jaw thing and a flamethrower in the final confrontation, so he's kind of like Machine Man partially, but not really. The legend exists in the background of this film through the name of the protagonist. And the protagonist's answer to the question, what are you going to do with all that strength, is, I'm going to rescue Honduran immigrants. I'm going to be kind to and protect these two Honduran immigrants. Interesting then that there is virtually no white people in the movie. I think one of the cops early on is white. But it really, even though it's a movie set in the modern world, you don't see the majority culture represented thematically or even apparently. We're living inside a black neighborhood, and there are Hispanic people here, and we've got to deal with that. So it's a unusual movie. We also don't see any economics. We don't play with the fact that, like, how's John Henry affording to feed these people? Like, he just is. It's just there. It's okay. That's not a part of the story we're telling, which to me seems to indicate that in as much as Terry Crews' character is named John Henry, his experiences of using his strength and facing what he needs to face in order to use his strength for what he intends to use his strength for, those represent John Henry as much as anyone's do. That anyone could be John Henry. John Henry has physical strength, and he uses it not for the railroad, but for protecting people, which is a good use of physical strength. What are you going to use your strength for? I think the movie would intend to ask. And it will help then. Also, it will be enjoyable for me, since I kind of miss the tall tale aspect, to look at that through the light of the traditional tall tale, right? So what is it that the tall tale has to say to Terry Crews' John Henry, with the knowledge that Terry Crews' John Henry says that the tall tale says these things to all of us? So of course the traditional tall tale deals with a man who drove holes for explosives in order to tunnel for the railroad. So he was a steel driving man. a man of great strength who was incredibly good at driving these holes, incredibly good with the hammer. He's born with a hammer in his hand. And he is challenged to face off against this new invention of a machine that will drive the same holes. They face off against each other depending on your version of the story. There's some give and take. John Henry stops for a break. The machine stops for new parts. And in the end, John Henry wins and dies. So he conquers the foe, and it costs him his life. This, by the way, is true of the new John Henry too, of Terry Crews' John Henry. He saves the immigrants, pays for it with his life. So when we use our strength, are we prepared to be totally used up the way John Henry was totally used up? And what for? What will we do with it? So what's the story about? I'm talking about the tall tale right now. What's the tall tale version of John Henry about? I actually think part of the reason why it is so resilient, why we keep talking about it, is because it is given to multiple interpretations. I think one really fair understanding of it would be to say that this is a story of Black excellence. So here's a man who is so good at what he does that even the white racists of his time are forced to give him props as being more successful than even what all of them together can muster. And that's an experience that I think, I have heard from my Black friends is very relatable to the idea that, like, hey, I can succeed in this world, but what I'm going to have to accomplish for my success is going to have to be significantly better than what you have to accomplish for the same amount of success for yourself. So here's a really successful Black person, and here's what that looks like, and here's what that costs. I think another way to read the traditional John Henry story has to do with rich versus poor. It has to do with capitalism and what it looks like to be a laborer versus what it looks like to be more of an industrialist, and how that works, and who do you sympathize with? Like, who is more human, and also what does it cost you if you give your life as a laborer to capitalism? And I think if you go with that story, you end up with a little bit of a sour taste in your mouth about John Henry. There's a realization like, wait a second, this is unfair. Like, John Henry was good at what he did. Why should he have to die with the hammer in his hand the way he was born? Shouldn't something change about society? And I think one of the ways we are palate cleansed from that sour interpretation is with a third interpretation I see. And by the way, you might have more interpretations. Let me know about them in the comments. Is that this is just a story about good old-fashioned ingenuity, doing things the good old-fashioned way, as opposed to doing them the newfangled way. And the good old-fashioned way is just better. The good old-fashioned way just wins. So instead of it being the poor way or the Black way, it's the old way. And I think people like hearing stories about the old way. All of that goes back to us. So when we relate to these stories, I think many of us don't have the experience of being Black, though if you do, certainly I want to hear what you think about John Henry. But we've had experiences of lacking finances, either institutionally, generationally, in the sense that is our day-to-day existence, that we are suffering under a lack of finances and a need to make rent again this month, or incidentally, in the sense of I don't have the ability to do what I would like to do because I am limited in my financial resources that allow us to relate to John Henry. Or we might have that last kind of way to relate, the sense of, hey, I'm a bit of a dinosaur, and the world is changing and moving beyond me, and what am I going to do about it? In each of those cases, there is strength there in your weakness. And this mediocre movie would like to know, what are you going to use that strength for?
And when in scenes of glory I sing the new song, 'twill be